My name is Theodore Ted Blackwood, and I'm 72 years old. 3 months ago, I thought my biggest worry was whether to sell my construction company or pass it down to the next generation. I'd built Blackwood & Sons Construction from nothing into the most respected contracting business in 3 counties. 48 years of dawn-to-dusk work, calloused hands, and smart investments had made me worth over $4 million. Then came the chest pain that changed everything. "Ted, you need surgery," Dr. Patterson said, sliding the test results across his desk. His voice carried that careful tone doctors use when delivering life-altering news. "Your left anterior descending artery is 95% blocked. Without intervention, you're looking at a massive heart attack within weeks." I stared at the black and white images of my heart displayed on his computer screen. The blocked artery looked like a clogged pipe in one of my construction projects, except this pipe kept me alive. At 72, I'd survived Vietnam, 3 decades of dangerous construction work, and the death of my beloved wife Martha 5 years ago. I'd always figured I was tougher than most problems life could throw at me. "How dangerous is the surgery?" I asked, keeping my voice steady the way I had when talking to worried clients about structural problems. Dr. Patterson removed his glasses and looked me directly in the eye. "I won't lie to you, Ted. At your age, with this level of blockage, there's a 15 to 20% chance of serious complications. Stroke, heart failure, or worse. But without surgery—" He didn't need to finish that sentence. We both knew the alternative was certain death. I sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. 15 to 20% chance of complications. In construction, those were the kinds of odds that made you double-check your safety equipment and have backup plans. But you still did the job that needed doing. That evening, I called my children. My oldest son, Derek, answered on the second ring, sounding distracted. "Dad, what's up? You usually text if you need something." Derek worked as an investment banker in the city and lived by his phone, but actual phone calls seemed to irritate him. Still, he was my firstborn, and I'd taught him everything about the construction business before he decided finance was more lucrative. "I need surgery, son. Heart surgery. Next Tuesday." The silence stretched long enough that I could hear Derek's expensive watch ticking in the background. "Dad, Jesus, how serious is this?" "Serious enough that I need to get my affairs in order." I tried to keep my voice matter-of-fact, but the words felt heavy in my mouth. "Don't talk like that." My daughter Riley's voice suddenly joined the call. She must have been visiting Derek's house. Riley worked as a physical therapist and understood medical situations better than her brother. "What exactly did the cardiologist say? What are the risks?" I explained everything, doctor. Patterson had told me. The blocked artery, the bypass surgery, the survival odds, the recovery timeline. Derek immediately started asking about the business, wanting to know who would handle the ongoing projects and payroll. Riley focused on my medical directives and whether I had updated my living will. Both of my children offered to visit before the surgery, but I could hear the hesitation in their voices. Derek mentioned a major deal he was closing that could net him a 7-figure bonus. Riley had just opened her own physical therapy clinic and couldn't afford to lose patients during the crucial startup phase. "Don't worry about visiting beforehand," I told them, though part of me hoped they would insist anyway. "Just be ready to help make decisions if something goes wrong during the surgery." What I didn't tell them was that I'd already made the most important decision of all. The next morning, I drove to Coleman Wright's office downtown. Coleman had been handling my finances for over 20 years, ever since Martha got sick, and I realized I needed professional help managing our investments and planning for the future. More than a financial advisor, he'd become my most trusted friend. "Ted, you look like hell," he said as I settled into the familiar chair across from his desk. Coleman had never been one for pleasantries, which was one of the reasons I respected him. "Heart surgery next week, Coleman." "Major surgery. I need to make some changes to my will." His expression shifted from casual concern to serious attention. "How bad are we talking here, Ted?" "Bad enough that there's a real chance I won't wake up from this operation. And even if I do, the recovery could take months. Coleman, I want to do something that might sound crazy, but I need to know who my children really are before I'm gone." Coleman leaned forward, his business instincts sharpening. "What kind of something?" What I was about to propose would reveal the true character of the 2 people I'd raised from babies, worked alongside for years, and planned to leave everything to. Depending on how Derek and Riley responded to my medical crisis, they might inherit a fortune. Or they might discover that blood alone doesn't guarantee a legacy. The test I had in mind would change our family forever, one way or another. Coleman pulled up my portfolio on his computer screen, adjusting his reading glasses as the numbers populated. You're worth about $4.2 million, not counting the construction company and equipment. The current will split everything equally between Derek and Riley. I want to add something, I said, leaning forward in my chair. A test. He raised an eyebrow and set down his coffee cup. What kind of test, Ted? I want to see what my children do if they think I'm not coming back from this surgery, whether they focus on helping me recover or whether they start circling like vultures around my bank accounts. Coleman was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen. He'd known Derek and Riley since they were teenagers working summer jobs at my construction sites. He'd watched Derek transform from a hard-working kid who could operate a backhoe into a slick city banker who wore $1,000 suits. He'd seen Riley grow from the tomboy who could swing a hammer alongside the crew into a successful professional who'd distanced herself from the family business. Ted, this feels like you're setting them up to fail. No, Coleman, I'm giving them a chance to show their true character. If they leave my money alone and focus on my recovery, nothing changes. The will stays as it is, and they inherit everything when I'm gone. But if they try to get their hands on my accounts while I'm fighting for my life, I let the implications hang in the air. Over the next hour, I outlined my plan. Coleman would monitor all my accounts during the surgery and recovery period. If Derek or Riley attempted to access my money, transfer funds, or pressure him for financial information while I was incapacitated, he would document everything. I was creating an irrevocable trust that would respond to their behavior during my medical crisis. The trust will have specific triggers, I explained. If they try to access my accounts without authorization, if they start making plans for my money before they know if I'll survive, if they treat my medical emergency as a business opportunity, the trust kicks in permanently. And if they do trigger it, then instead of inheriting $2 million each, they get a wake-up call about what family loyalty actually means. Coleman printed out the preliminary documents, his expression troubled. Ted, are you sure about this? These are your children we're talking about. That's exactly why I need to know who they really are. That Friday evening, Derek drove up from the city in his new BMW. My son looked every inch the successful investment banker, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, and that confident smile he'd developed since making his first million. But I could see the worry lines around his eyes as we sat on my back porch overlooking the construction yard where he'd learned to drive bulldozers as a teenager. Dad, I've been thinking about the surgery, he said, loosening his tie in the warm evening air. Have you considered what happens if there are complications? Extended hospital stays can be incredibly expensive, even with insurance. I've got good coverage, son. But what about the business? Those big commercial projects you're working on? The hospital expansion, the new shopping center? If you can't supervise personally, you could lose those contracts. I studied Derek's face as he spoke. His concern seemed genuine, but there was something calculating in his expression that reminded me uncomfortably of his mother when she was managing our household budget with military precision. The four men can handle things for a few weeks. A few weeks? Dad, heart surgery recovery can take months. And if something goes wrong... He trailed off, then seemed to gather his courage. Maybe I should take a leave of absence, come back and help manage things. Make sure the business doesn't fall apart while you're recovering. Derek hadn't shown interest in the construction company for over 15 years. He'd made it clear that he considered his finance career far more prestigious than getting his hands dirty with manual labor. His sudden concern for Blackwood and Sons felt suspiciously convenient. Saturday morning, Riley arrived with her teenage daughter, Emma. My granddaughter had inherited her mother's athletic build and her grandfather's stubborn streak. She spent most of her visit exploring the construction equipment yard, fascination overriding the typical teenage disdain for family obligations. Riley, meanwhile, seemed unusually focused on practical matters. Dad, we need to talk about your medical directives. What if you can't make decisions for yourself during recovery? I've got everything documented with my lawyer. But who has power of attorney? Who can access your accounts if bills need to be paid? She pulled out a folder of papers she'd obviously prepared in advance. I printed out some forms, just temporary arrangements until you're back on your feet. My daughter, the same girl who'd once insisted on being paid the same wages as my adult workers when she helped with summer jobs, was now suggesting I sign over control of my finances while I was vulnerable. The irony wasn't lost on me. Riley, I'm going into surgery, not a coma. But what if there are complications? What if you're unconscious for days or weeks? Someone needs to be able to handle your affairs." That evening, after both children had returned to their respective lives, I called Coleman. "They're already positioning themselves," I told him. "Derek wants to take over the business. Riley wants power of attorney over my accounts. Neither one of them asked how I was feeling about the surgery, or if I was scared, or if I needed emotional support." "Maybe they're just trying to be helpful, Ted." "Maybe. Or maybe they're showing me exactly who they've become. Coleman, I want you to proceed with the trust documents, and I want you to be very careful about what information you give them after the surgery." Monday morning, I signed the irrevocable trust in Coleman's office with his secretary and the attorney Amanda Foster as witnesses. The document was airtight. If Derek and Riley focused on my recovery and left my finances alone, they would inherit everything as originally planned. But if they tried to access my money or manipulate the situation while I was fighting for my life, the consequences would be swift and permanent. "Last chance to change your mind," Coleman said as I signed the final page. "No," I replied, thinking of Martha and how she'd always worried that we were giving our children too much, too easily. It's time to find out what kind of people I raised. Tuesday morning arrived with heavy clouds threatening rain. Riley picked me up at 5 a.m., her face tight with worry as we drove through the empty streets to County General Hospital. Derek had flown in the night before but was meeting us at the hospital after handling some urgent client calls. In the preoperative area, Riley held my hand while the anesthesiologist explained the procedure one final time. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with the sound of beeping monitors reminded me why I'd always avoided hospitals. "I love you, Dad," Riley whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "You're going to be fine." "I love you too, sweetheart. Take care of your brother if something happens to me." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Nothing's going to happen. You're the toughest man I know." But I could see the fear in her eyes. Riley had worked in medical facilities long enough to understand exactly how dangerous this surgery was for someone my age. The statistics weren't just numbers to her, they were real possibilities. Dr. Patterson arrived to review the surgical plan one final time. "Any last questions, Ted?" "Just one. How long before you'll know if I'm going to make it?" "We'll have a good sense within the first 24 hours. But Ted, I've been doing this for 28 years. You're in better shape than most patients 20 years younger." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I saw Derek rushing through the hospital corridors, his phone pressed to his ear even at 6 a.m. He looked panicked, but whether about my surgery or his business deal, I couldn't tell. "Love you, Dad," he called out, finally putting away his phone. Those might be the last words I ever heard from my son, I thought as the anesthesia began to take hold. What I didn't know was that before I'd even reached the recovery room, Derek was already making phone calls. Riley later told me she'd overheard him in the family waiting area, speaking in the hushed but urgent tones he used for his most important clients. "Coleman, it's Derek Blackwood. We need to discuss Dad's situation. The doctors say the next 48 hours are critical." Coleman, following my instructions perfectly, played his role with the right amount of professional concern. "Derek, I understand you're worried, but your father was very specific about his financial privacy. I can't discuss his accounts unless there's a death certificate or legal incapacitation. But what if we need to pay for additional medical care? What if there are experimental treatments that insurance won't cover? The hospital has his insurance information. If there's a genuine emergency, call me immediately." What Derek didn't realize was that Coleman was documenting every conversation, recording every attempt to access information about my finances. By Wednesday afternoon, I was awake but heavily sedated in the cardiac ICU. The surgery had gone better than expected. Dr. Patterson had successfully bypassed 3 blocked arteries, but I was still in critical condition. The next 48 hours would determine whether there were complications like stroke or heart failure. Riley had taken leave from her clinic and was practically living in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed. Every few hours, she'd update me on my vital signs, explaining the medical equipment in terms I could understand. Derek split his time between pacing the hallways and making business calls from the family lounge. Through the fog of pain medication, I heard fragments of their conversations in the hallway. Derek was explaining to someone on his phone that he might need to extend his leave of absence. Riley was calling her own clients to reschedule appointments, but there was something else in their voices when they thought I couldn't hear, a tension that had nothing to do with medical concerns. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Coleman. Derek called 3 times today asking about account balances. Riley requested information about the construction company assets. It's starting, Ted. The test had begun. Wednesday evening, while I lay connected to machines monitoring every heartbeat, Derek made his first real move. Riley told me later she'd seen him pacing the hospital parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with his free hand like he was negotiating a major deal. Coleman, I need access to Dad's business accounts, Derek said, his investment banker voice crisp and professional. There are immediate issues that need attention. Coleman, playing his part perfectly, sounded appropriately concerned. What kind of issues, Derek? Well, there are 3 major construction projects running right now. The crews need to be paid on Friday, suppliers have invoices due, and there's that big hospital expansion contract. If payments get delayed, we could lose everything Dad's worked for. Derek, your father was very specific about his business operations. He said the foremen have authority to handle day-to-day operations, and the company accountant manages payroll. There was a pause. I could almost hear Derek calculating his next approach. Coleman, between you and me, how much are we talking about here? Not for access, just so I know what we're dealing with if Dad doesn't pull through this. Derek, I can't discuss specific figures. I'm not asking for account numbers. I just need to understand the scope of what I might need to manage. The business alone, the liquid assets, everything. Is it $2 million? $5 million? Coleman sighed as if reluctantly breaking his professional discretion. Including business assets, equipment, real estate, and personal investments, your father is worth approximately $4.2 million. The silence on Derek's end stretched for nearly 10 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality. Sharper, more focused. Jesus, I had no idea it was that much. Thursday morning brought what should have been encouraging news. I was more alert, my vital signs had stabilized, and Dr. Patterson was cautiously optimistic about my recovery. But I was still weak, still connected to multiple monitors, still very much fighting for my life. Riley was reading me updates from the construction sites when Derek entered the ICU room carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his most expensive suit, the one he saved for meeting with his wealthiest clients. Dad, how are you feeling? He asked, but his eyes kept darting between me and the medical equipment, as if calculating the odds of my survival. Like I've been hit by a bulldozer, I managed to whisper. Derek pulled a chair closer to my bed and opened his briefcase with practiced efficiency. Dad, I've been thinking about the business situation. The Riverside Hospital project alone is worth $800,000. If you can't oversee it personally, they might cancel the contract. Riley looked up from her tablet. He just had major surgery yesterday. Can we not talk business right now? We have to talk business, Derek snapped, his composure cracking slightly. Someone needs to think practically here. Dad, I've had my attorney draft some temporary documents. He pulled out a stack of papers. Nothing permanent, just power of attorney for business decisions until you're back on your feet. I stared at the documents. My own son, less than 48 hours after my heart surgery, was trying to get legal control over my company while I lay in intensive care, barely strong enough to hold a conversation. I need to think about it, I whispered. Dad, we don't have time to think. The Riverside contract has a clause about project supervision. If you're not physically present at key milestones, they can terminate for cause. We're talking about losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. This was interesting. I'd negotiated that contract myself 6 months ago. There was no such supervision clause. Derek was either mistaken about the terms, or he was lying to create urgency. Derek, Riley said, her voice sharp with disapproval. Dad needs to focus on recovering, not on business contracts. And what happens if he doesn't recover? Derek shot back. What happens if there are complications? Or if he's disabled for months? Someone has to protect what he's built. After Derek left to make more phone calls, Riley shook her head in disgust. I can't believe he's pressuring you about this now. You just survived major surgery. What would you do, Riley? If you were in his position? She looked confused by the question. I'd focus on helping you get better. The business will survive a few weeks without micromanagement. That afternoon, while Riley was getting coffee and Derek was supposedly meeting with my construction foreman, I received an unexpected visitor. Derek's wife, Melissa, appeared in my ICU room, looking nervous and overdressed for a hospital visit. Ted, I hope you don't mind me coming by. Derek's been so worried about you in the business. Melissa had always been polite but distant. In the 12 years since Derek married her, she'd visited my house perhaps a dozen times, usually for major holidays and always with an excuse to leave early. "How are you holding up?" she asked, sitting in the visitor's chair but perching on the edge like she planned to flee at any moment. Taking it one day at a time. "Ted, I need to be honest with you about something." She glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "Derek's investment firm is in serious trouble. He made some very risky trades last quarter, and the partners are talking about forcing him out. We could lose everything. The house, the kids' college funds, everything." She let that information settle before continuing. "If something happens to you, if you don't make it through this recovery, Derek needs to know that the family business will be there to fall back on. It's not just about the money, Ted. It's about survival." I closed my eyes, pretending to be more exhausted than I was. I need to rest now. But I wasn't resting. I was testing the voice recorder app on my phone, making sure it had captured every word of Melissa's confession, because she had just given me the missing piece of the puzzle. The real reason Derek was suddenly so interested in gaining control of my assets while I lay fighting for my life. My son wasn't trying to protect my business. He was trying to save his own career by positioning himself to inherit my life's work as quickly as possible. Thursday night, despite the pain medication, sleep wouldn't come. Through my partially open ICU door, I could hear Derek and Riley talking in hushed voices in the family consultation room down the hall. The hospital's night shift moved quietly around the ward, but their urgent whispers carried in the sterile air. "Riley, you have to be realistic," Derek was saying. "The doctors said there could still be complications. What if he has another heart attack? What if he needs months of rehabilitation?" "He's going to be fine," Riley insisted, but I could hear uncertainty creeping into her voice. "His vitals are improving every hour." "But what if he's not fine?" Derek's tone sharpened. "What if he ends up needing long-term care? Do you have any idea how much that costs? We're talking about potentially millions in medical bills that could drain everything he's worked for." There was a long pause. I strained to hear Riley's response. "The insurance. Insurance has limits, Riley. And Dad's proud. He'll want the best care money can buy, even if it means spending every penny he has." Another pause. I could almost hear my daughter thinking. "What are you suggesting?" she finally asked. Derek's voice dropped even lower, forcing me to strain to catch his words. "I'm suggesting we need to be proactive. If we can get temporary financial authority, we could move some assets into protected accounts before any catastrophic medical bills hit them." "Move them where?" "Family trusts, offshore accounts, legal shelters that medical creditors can't touch. It's not about taking anything from Dad. It's about making sure there's something left for everyone when this is over." "And if he recovers completely?" "Then we transfer everything back. No harm done." But I heard the hesitation in Derek's voice, the slight pause that revealed his real intentions. There would be no transferring back if he got his hands on my money. "I don't know, Derek. This feels wrong." "What feels wrong is watching Dad's life's work disappear into hospital bills when we could prevent it. Riley, you're a medical professional. You know what extended cardiac care costs. We're not stealing from him. We're protecting his legacy." Friday morning brought news that should have been cause for celebration. Dr. Patterson upgraded my condition from critical to stable and mentioned the possibility of moving me out of intensive care by the weekend. "This is wonderful progress," Riley said, genuinely smiling for the first time since the surgery. But Derek's expression was harder to read. After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Derek kept checking his phone and glancing at the door like he was expecting someone. "Dad," he said finally, "we need to talk about practical matters. The business can't run itself indefinitely." Before I could respond, Riley jumped in. "Actually, Dad, Derek and I have been discussing some financial protections. Just temporary measures while you recover." So they'd coordinated their approach. My two children, working together to convince their vulnerable father to sign over control of his life savings. "What kind of protections?" I whispered. Derek pulled out his briefcase again, but this time Riley had matching folders. They'd come prepared with a unified strategy. "Well," Riley said, her physical therapist's calm voice taking on a rehearsed quality, "if you need extended rehabilitation or experimental treatments, the costs could be enormous. We think some of your assets should be moved to protected accounts." "Protected from what?" "Medical creditors," Derek said smoothly. "If something happens and you need long-term care, These financial arrangements would ensure your legacy stays intact." I looked at my children, Derek in his expensive suit, Riley in her professional attire, both of them presenting legal documents while I lay connected to heart monitors, neither one asking how I felt, whether I was scared, or if I needed emotional support. Just money. Just my money. "I need to think about this," I said. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Dad, time is really a factor here. The longer we wait, the more vulnerable your assets become." That afternoon, while they thought I was napping, I sent a text to Coleman with shaking fingers. "Both kids working together now, have coordinated strategy for asset protection. Friday afternoon meeting planned." His response came quickly. "Documented everything. The trap is set perfectly. Are you ready for what comes next?" I wasn't sure anyone could be ready for what I was about to discover about the people I'd raised and loved for decades. Saturday morning, Riley went home to shower and check on Emma, leaving me alone with Derek for the first time since surgery. I pretended to be groggier than I was, hoping to overhear his real plans. Derek paced beside my bed, phone in hand, speaking in whispers he thought I couldn't hear. "The online accounts we can handle ourselves," he murmured into the phone, "but the investment portfolios will require phone authorization from Coleman." "Who are you talking to?" I mumbled, keeping my eyes closed. "Just handling some business calls, Dad. Go back to sleep." But through barely open eyes, I could see him scrolling through what looked like banking apps on his phone. He'd been researching my financial accounts, probably trying to find ones he could access without Coleman's involvement. An hour later, Derek received a call that made him step into the hallway. His voice carried back through the thin walls. "Melissa, I need you to do something for me. Remember Dad's voice from Christmas dinner? I need you to practice saying his social security number and date of birth, exactly like he would say it." My blood ran cold. My son was planning to use voice impersonation to access my accounts while I lay recovering from heart surgery. When Derek returned to my bedside, his demeanor had changed. He seemed more focused, more determined. "Dad, I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday. The power of attorney documents. I really think we need to move on this today." "Why the rush?" "Well, Monday is when all the banks and investment firms reopen after the weekend. If we're going to protect your assets, we need the legal authority in place first thing Monday morning." Sunday brought an unexpected development. Riley returned with a laptop and what appeared to be voice recording equipment. "Dad, the insurance company needs some verbal confirmations for your surgery coverage," she said, setting up the equipment beside my bed. "Just routine stuff, but they need it recorded for their files." "What kind of confirmations?" "Just your name, social security number, date of birth, standard identity verification." I realized what was happening. Riley, the daughter I'd thought was more ethical than Derek, was also planning to use voice synthesis fraud. They weren't just coordinating their legal strategy, they were planning to impersonate me electronically. "Can we do this later?" "I'm tired." "Dad, it'll just take 2 minutes. The insurance company said if we don't get this filed by Monday, there could be delays in processing your surgical claims." Reluctantly, I provided the information they requested, speaking clearly into Riley's recording device. But what they didn't know was that I was simultaneously recording the entire conversation on my phone's voice memo app. That evening, after both children had left for the night, I called Coleman on the secure line we'd established. "They're planning voice fraud," I whispered. "Both of them. They recorded my personal information today under the pretense of insurance requirements. Ted, I've been expecting this. When they call tomorrow morning impersonating you, I'm going to give them exactly the response they deserve." "What kind of response?" "Trust me, tomorrow is going to be very educational for Derek and Riley." Monday morning arrived with the sound of Derek on his phone in the hospital corridor at 7 a.m., speaking to what sounded like multiple financial institutions. I could hear fragments of conversations, account numbers, transfer requests, authorization codes. At 9:17 a.m., my bedside phone rang. "Dad, I have Coleman on the line," Derek said, his voice unnaturally formal. "He needs to verify some account information with you for a transfer." "Put him through," I said, playing my part perfectly. "Mr. Blackwood," Coleman's voice was professionally crisp, "I need to confirm your identity for some urgent transfers. Can you verify your social security number and date of birth?" I deliberately gave him numbers that were different from what Derek and Riley had recorded. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood, but those numbers don't match our security records. I'll need to call you back to verify through alternative methods." He hung up, leaving Derek standing beside my bed with a confused and increasingly panicked expression. The trap had been set. Now we'd see just how far my children were willing to go. Monday evening, Derek knocked on my hospital room door looking haggard. His expensive suit was wrinkled and I could see sweat stains despite the air conditioning. "Dad, there's been a problem with your bank accounts. Coleman says someone tried to access them fraudulently." "What do you mean?" I asked, sitting up slightly in bed. "Someone called the bank pretending to be you, trying to authorize transfers. Coleman had to freeze everything as a security precaution." This was fascinating. Derek was using their own failed fraud attempt to create urgency for legitimate access to my accounts. "How do we fix it?" "You need to call Coleman first thing tomorrow and reset all your security protocols." "But Dad," he paused dramatically. "What if this happens again? What if someone targets you while you're recovering?" Riley appeared in the doorway, holding a coffee and looking equally stressed. "Dad, Derek and I think you should temporarily transfer your liquid assets to a secure family trust, just until you're fully recovered." "Who would control this trust?" "Well, as your children and co-trustees." "I never agreed to make you trustees, Derek." Another pause. "Right, that's something we need to formalize tomorrow, too." I could see their desperation growing. My faster-than-expected recovery had compressed their timeline and forced them into increasingly bold moves. "Let me think about it overnight," I said. After they left my room, I called Coleman on our secure line. "How desperate are they getting?" he asked. "Very. They're pushing for bank meetings tomorrow and trust documents." "Perfect. I have a surprise for them." "What kind of surprise?" "Let's just say I've been busy documenting everything while you were recovering. Tomorrow is going to be very educational for Derek and Riley." Tuesday morning, Riley insisted on driving me to First National Bank in a wheelchair, despite my protests that I could walk. "You shouldn't overexert yourself so soon after surgery," she said, but I noticed she'd dressed like she was attending a business meeting. Derek met us at the bank with 2 briefcases full of legal documents. "Just some paperwork to streamline things," he explained. Inside the bank, we were directed to a conference room where Coleman was waiting with someone I didn't recognize, a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit. "Ted, this is Amanda Foster," Coleman said. "She's an attorney specializing in elder fraud." Derek's face went pale. "Elder fraud? What are you talking about?" Amanda opened her laptop. "Mr. Blackwood, we've been monitoring attempted unauthorized access to your father's accounts since his surgery. Would you like to see the evidence?" The screen showed a detailed log of every phone call Derek and Riley had made to financial institutions, including timestamps, IP addresses, and recorded attempts at voice impersonation. "This is ridiculous," Riley sputtered. "We were trying to protect his assets." "By attempting to use voice synthesis to impersonate him?" Amanda played a recording where synthetic audio of my voice was clearly attempting to authorize transfers. "That wasn't... We weren't..." Derek looked like he might be sick. "Actually," I said, speaking clearly for the first time that morning, "this is exactly what I expected." Both of my children turned to stare at me in shock. "Surprised I'm so alert today? Funny thing about recovery, some days are better than others." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "I've been documenting your behavior since I woke up from surgery. Every conversation, every plan, every attempt to access my money while I was fighting for my life." Riley's face went white. "You were awake?" "When we were talking in the family lounge." "Thursday night?" "Oh yes. Very enlightening discussion about protecting my assets from medical bills. And Derek, that conversation with Melissa about your failing investment firm? I recorded that too." Amanda Foster opened her briefcase. "Mr. Blackwood, based on the evidence you've provided, we have grounds for criminal charges. Attempted fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse." "Wait," Derek interrupted. "Dad, please, I can explain." "Explain what? That you started planning to steal my money before you even knew if I'd survived surgery? That you researched voice synthesis to impersonate me? That you lied about contract clauses to create urgency?" "We weren't stealing," Riley protested. "We were protecting." "You were protecting yourselves," I said firmly. "Derek, your investment firm is failing and you needed my money to save your career. Riley, you went along because you were afraid of being left out of the inheritance." Derek was staring at the floor. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was desperate. I was going to lose everything." "Derek, in 48 years of building my business, I never once considered stealing from family to solve my problems. When your mother got sick and the medical bills nearly bankrupted us, I worked 3 jobs to pay them off. I didn't look for someone else's money to take." Coleman leaned forward. "Ted, what would you like to do?" I looked at my son and daughter. Derek was crying now. Riley looked defiant, still convinced she could argue her way out of this. "I want to show them something," I said. Amanda Foster pulled out another document. "Mr. Blackwood created an irrevocable trust before his surgery. The terms were very specific." "What kind of trust?" Riley asked. "One that responds to the beneficiary's behavior during the truster's medical crisis," Amanda explained. "If you had left his finances alone and focused on his recovery, the trust would have dissolved, and his original will would stand." "And since we didn't," Derek whispered. "Since you didn't," I replied, "the trust remains in effect, permanently." The room was silent except for the air conditioning humming. "What does that mean?" Riley asked. Coleman opened his laptop. "It means that instead of inheriting roughly $2 million each, your inheritance has been adjusted." "Adjusted how?" Derek demanded, his voice cracking. Coleman pulled up the trust documents on his laptop screen. "Derek, your inheritance is now $25,000. Riley, yours has been reduced to $50,000. Derek stared at the screen in shock. $25,000 out of $4.2 million? The trust was very specific about consequences, Amanda Foster explained. Attempted fraud by the primary beneficiary results in a 98% reduction. As the secondary beneficiary who participated but showed some initial reluctance, Riley receives a lesser penalty. "Where does the rest go?" Riley asked, her voice barely a whisper. $3.8 million goes to the Ted Blackwood Foundation for Veterans Health Care, Coleman said. "Your father established it this morning." Derek stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. "Dad, you can't do this to your own children." "Children?" I laughed bitterly. "Derek, you researched voice fraud while I was in surgery. You lied about business contracts to pressure me. You admitted through Melissa that you saw my medical emergency as your financial salvation. What part of that sounds like a son to you?" Derek was staring at his hands. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was desperate. The partners were going to destroy my career." "Derek, when I was your age and nearly lost everything during the recession, I didn't look around for family members to steal from. I worked construction jobs 16 hours a day to rebuild. I didn't try to access my dying father's bank account." "But we're your children." "Yes, and I raised you to be better than this." Riley finally spoke up. "Dad, what about our kids? Emma's college fund, Derek's boys? You're punishing your grandchildren too." "I'm teaching them that actions have consequences. That family means more than money, lessons their parents apparently never learned." Amanda Foster cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwood, we still need to address the attempted fraud. This is a criminal matter." I looked at Derek and Riley, really looked at them. My son, who I'd taught to operate heavy machinery, who'd called me every Father's Day for 20 years, who'd just tried to steal millions from his recovering father. My daughter, who I'd walked down the aisle, who'd always been the responsible one until money made her abandon her ethics. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally. "Dad," Derek started, "but this is the last conversation we'll have about money. The trust is irrevocable. Your inheritance is what it is. What you do with that knowledge is up to you." Riley grabbed her purse. "Derek, we're leaving. Dad's clearly lost his mind." Derek hesitated, looking between me and Riley. "Go ahead," I said softly. "Go with your sister." "Dad, I love you." "I love you too, Derek, but love isn't enough anymore." Over the following weeks, as I completed my recovery at home, the full impact of my decision became clear. Derek called several times, alternating between desperate apologies and bitter anger. $25,000, Dad, he said during one particularly harsh phone call. "That's what 45 years of being your son is worth. Melissa's already talking to divorce lawyers." "I'm sorry your marriage is ending, Derek." "Are you? Because it feels like you planned this whole thing to destroy my life." He wasn't entirely wrong. I created an opportunity for you to show your character. You made your choices. And now I'm losing everything. My wife, my house, probably my partnership at the firm. Derek, you're 45 years old. You're brilliant and have a law degree. You can rebuild your life on honest work instead of inheritance money. With what? I'll be lucky to avoid bankruptcy. The conversation ended badly, like most of our conversations now. But 3 days later, he called back with a different tone. Dad, I need to ask you something. What? Why 25,000? Why not just disinherit me completely? I'd been waiting for this question. Because that's exactly enough to start over if you're willing to work for it. It's seed money, not a solution. Start over how? However you choose. Move somewhere with lower costs. Open a small practice helping real people instead of shuffling corporate money. Learn to live within your means. Derek was quiet for a long time. You really think I can do that? I think you can do anything, son. The question is whether you want to be the man I raised, or stay the man Wall Street made you become. Riley's reaction was different but equally painful. She'd taken a leave of absence from her clinic and was barely speaking to me. When she did call, it was usually Emma on the phone. Grandpa Ted, Mom's really upset, my 16-year-old granddaughter said during one conversation. She says you don't trust her anymore. Emma, your mother tried to steal money from me while I was in the hospital. How would you feel if someone did that to you? I don't know, but she's still my mom, and you're still my grandpa. Can't you guys figure this out? Out of the mouths of babes. Emma was showing more wisdom than either of her parents. 6 months later, Derek had indeed filed for bankruptcy and moved to a small town in Montana, where he'd opened a modest practice helping ranchers and small businesses with legal issues. He was earning about 1/10 of his previous salary, but when he called, he sounded different. Dad, I'm sleeping through the night for the first time in years, he admitted during one of our monthly conversations. I forgot what it felt like not to owe money to everyone. How do you feel about the simpler life? Some days I hate it. Some days I remember why I went to law school in the first place. To help people, not just make money. Riley had kept her clinic but downsized her house and lifestyle significantly. The $50,000 from my trust had helped, but she'd also learned to live more modestly. Dad, I've been thinking about what happened at the hospital, she said during a rare phone call. When I saw you lying there with all those machines, my first thought should have been gratitude that you survived. Instead, I was calculating how much your care might cost and what that meant for the inheritance. What do you think about that now? I think I became someone I don't recognize. Someone who put money before people, before family. The most unexpected change came at Thanksgiving. Derek called from Montana, something he hadn't done since our confrontation at the bank. Dad, I want to tell you something. What? You were right. About the test, about Melissa, about everything. I didn't realize how far I'd drifted from the values you taught me until I lost everything. Derek, let me finish. When I saw you in that hospital bed, connected to all those machines, my first thought wasn't fear for your life. It was opportunity for mine. That's not who I wanted to be. I felt tears forming. Who do you want to be? I want to be the son who deserves that $25,000 inheritance. Not because of the money, but because of what it represents. What does it represent? A second chance. A chance to prove I can build something worthwhile through honest work instead of shortcuts and inheritance money. That Christmas, Derek drove down from Montana for the first time since the surgery. He looked different. Thinner, more weathered, but somehow more solid. More real. The house looks smaller, he said, looking around the living room where he'd grown up. You've been living differently. Yeah, I forgot that big doesn't always mean better. Riley and Emma joined us for dinner. It was awkward at first, but as the evening wore on, we found ourselves talking about things other than money. Derek's new clients, Riley's volunteer work at a free clinic, Emma's plans for college. You know what I realized? Derek said as we sat by the fireplace. I spent so many years chasing wealth that I forgot what it felt like to be proud of my work. Now I help families keep their ranches, immigrants navigate legal systems, kids who made mistakes get second chances. The money's terrible, but I actually like who I am again. Riley nodded. I've been volunteering at the VA hospital, working with veterans who have nothing but still find ways to help each other. It reminded me why I became a healthcare worker in the first place. On Derek's last evening, he turned to me with an expression I recognized from his childhood. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Was it worth it? Losing Melissa, the big house, the Wall Street career, was it worth it to discover who I really am? I thought carefully about my answer. Son, only you can answer that question. But I can tell you this. The man sitting in my living room right now is someone I'm proud to know. The man who tried to steal my money while I was in surgery? I didn't recognize that person at all. It's been 2 years since my heart surgery, and I'm sitting on my back porch watching the sunset paint the construction yard in shades of gold and amber. The doctors say my heart is stronger than it was before the operation. Sometimes the body needs to be broken down before it can be rebuilt properly. The same, I've learned, is true of families. Derek visits every few months now, driving down from his small Montana town in a dusty pickup truck instead of the BMW he used to own. He talks about his clients, the ranching family he helped keep their land when the bank tried to foreclose, the young veteran he's representing in a disability case, the small business owner navigating a contract dispute. His practice grows slowly, built on reputation rather than marketing, on handshakes rather than hedge fund connections. I make about $40,000 a year now, he told me last month, sitting in the same chair where he'd once pressured me to sign power of attorney documents. You know what, Dad? It's enough. I sleep well at night, and I actually respect the person in the mirror. Last spring, he met someone, a schoolteacher named Sarah who volunteers at the same legal aid clinic where Derek donates his time. She drives a 10-year-old Honda, grows her own vegetables, and thinks Derek's work helping struggling families is important. She's nothing like Melissa, who remarried a hedge fund manager within 6 months of their divorce. Sarah likes who I am, not what I have, Derek explained when he brought her to meet me. She's not impressed by money because she doesn't need it to be happy. Riley has undergone her own transformation. She kept her physical therapy clinic but downsized to a smaller location and now spends 3 days a week volunteering at the VA hospital. The work doesn't pay, but she says it reminds her why she chose healthcare in the first place. Dad, you taught me that success isn't what you accumulate but what you contribute, she told me during her last visit. I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way, but I'm remembering now. The biggest surprise came 6 months ago when Derek called with unexpected news. Dad, I want to give back the $25,000. I was stunned. What do you mean? I mean, I want you to donate it to the foundation. I don't want inheritance money anymore. Everything I have I want to earn through my own work. Derek, that money was meant to help you restart. It did help me restart. It gave me the breathing room to build something honest. But now I want to prove I can sustain it without family money. That conversation marked the moment I knew Derek had truly found himself again. The son who'd tried to defraud me while I was unconscious had become a man who would voluntarily give up an inheritance to preserve his integrity. Coleman visits once a month now, not as my financial advisor, but as my chess partner and friend. We sit on this same porch, moving pieces on an old wooden board while talking about life. Do you regret the test? He asked me recently. Which part? Testing them, or the consequences when they failed? Both. I thought carefully about my answer. I regret that the test was necessary. I regret that my children had drifted so far from family values that they could look at their dying father and see a financial opportunity. But I don't regret learning the truth. And the harsh consequences? The consequences saved them both. If I'd just given Derek $2 million, he would have paid off his debts and continued the same destructive lifestyle. He needed to lose everything to discover who he really was underneath all that Wall Street ambition. The Ted Blackwood Foundation for Veterans Healthcare has grown beyond my expectations. We've funded 3 new cardiac units at VA hospitals and provided emergency assistance to over 500 veteran families. The money I built over 48 years of construction work is now serving the men and women who served our country. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Derek and Riley had simply focused on my recovery instead of my bank account. The trust would have dissolved, and they would have inherited everything according to my original will. But I've come to believe that people reveal their true character under pressure, and my medical crisis simply accelerated revelations that would have emerged eventually. As I write this final entry, I'm preparing for another family visit. Derek is driving down with Sarah for the weekend, and Riley is bringing Emma, who's now a freshman studying social work at the State University. We're going to work in the construction yard together, teaching Emma how to operate the smaller equipment and talk about everything except money. The irony isn't lost on me that my heart had to be broken open for my family to be healed, but sometimes the most important surgery happens outside the operating room, in the quiet moments when we choose who we want to be and how we want to love. My children learned that inheritance is earned through character, not just blood relation. I learned that true wealth isn't measured by bank statements, but by the pride you feel when your children choose integrity over easy money. The heart surgery was a complete success. But the family surgery? That took 2 years, cost nearly $4 million in redistributed inheritance, and required the courage to risk losing everything for the possibility of rebuilding something authentic. Tonight, Derek called just to tell me about a case he'd won for an elderly veteran who'd been cheated by a contractor. Riley called to share photos from her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital. 2 children who once calculated my worth in dollars now measure their own worth in service to others. Sometimes the most epic response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's simply revealing the truth and letting people choose who they want to become with that knowledge. In the end, we all got exactly what we deserved, and discovered that what we deserved was far more valuable than what we'd originally wanted.